December 17th, 1944. Honsfeld, Belgium. Snow grinds under tracks like teeth. Panthers breathe, frost radios hiss, and a German lieutenant colonel scans a village that smells of gasoline. A runner gasps, an American fuel dump, full drums, hoses, pumps. Engines idle, starving. Orders crackle. Captured mechanics are marched to the valves. Metal rings, lids pop. Amber fuel gurgles into jerry cans. For 1 hot minute in the blue cold, Antwerp feels possible. Then bridges ahead are gone, roads choke, and the map looks longer than the gauges. 50,000 gallons glitter in the yard, yet time already drinks it. Too late. On paper, the promise is absolute. The West Wall stands behind them. The Ardennes stands before them, thin American. Briefing rooms repeat the catechism: quality over quantity, shock over attrition, secrecy over caution. Panthers and tigers will spear. Volksgrenadiers will crack the line. Bridges will fall into German hands, and Antwerp will starve the enemy of fuel. Radio men memorize code words. Pioneers rehearse demolition in reverse. Quartermasters assure the spearheads that captured gasoline will flow like a river. Staff slides glow with arrows sprinting to the Meuse. A winter storm is promised as an ally, grounding jobos, smothering reconnaissance, masking the approach until the last turn. Even the shortages feel temporary, synthetic plants recovering, railheads restored, the Luftwaffe husbanded for the decisive blow. Officers tell their men they will dine from American dumps by nightfall. They will fuel from enemy barrels. They will prove that German skill multiplies German scarcity. The colonel believes enough to lead. He knows the crews are sharp, the guns true, the camouflage patient. He trusts the plan's tempo hours, not days, to outrun arithmetic. What he does not know is how far a continent's logistics can reach, or how fast bridges can vanish when engineers read the same map. They laughed because arithmetic seemed to be on their side. German arithmetic, not American. A panther equals 3 Shermans, the line officers would say, half joke, half doctrine. And when a gunnery range day went well, the joke hardened into belief. The Allied tank, they said, was a factory product stamped like a biscuit. Crude welds high, silhouette, soft armor. Its crews were interchangeable. Its heart was quantity. In the smoky warmth of a maintenance shed the night before, the push, a Feldwebel, tapped the glacis of a Panther and muttered that American armor died quickly if you looked at it correctly through an 88. They mocked the Allied dependence on roads. America, they believed, needed ribbon highways and traffic discipline and military police with white gloves to choreograph a ballet of trucks. A collapsed bridge could paralyze a course. A blown culvert could ripple chaos down arteries that carried food, artillery shells, and most deliciously fuel. Americans were road-bound, map-bound, schedule-bound. The Ardennes, with its choked lanes and ice-slick hairpins, would be the anvil that bent their love of neat columns into uselessness. They mocked the Air Force, too, because the sky belonged to the weather in December. Over coffee that tasted of burned barley, an Oberleutnant declared that if the clouds held low and mean American fighter bombers would become ground rumors. No rockets slashing convoys, no P-47s stooping like hawks. The Luftwaffe, carefully husbanded, would appear at the decisive hour as if pulled from a sleeve. Even if it did not, the storm would be enough fog, as alley ice as doctrine. They mocked the Allied appetite. American soldiers, they said, were soft from abundance. Even in the line, they expected hot meals, cigarettes that never ran out, mail that found them in any woodlot. That softness required a tail as big as a town and as fragile as a rumor. Cut the tail, and the head would look longingly over its shoulder and stop. A German ration could be stretched. An American one was a contract with a grocer back in Ohio. Break the contract, and the soldier would break too. They mocked Allied command, too many echelons, too many radios, too many signatures required to move a division 10 kilometers. A German colonel could steal initiative and be forgiven if he delivered. An American colonel, they said, would ask 3 times and then hold. The enemy's doctrine worshipped mass but feared improvisation. The Ardennes would force improvisation upon them at the wrong hour. They mocked American artillery as dependent on delicate webs of wire and forward observers with fragile radios. Blind the network, cut lines, jam air, shock the command posts, and the vaunted time on target would degrade into ungainly thunder. A quick thrust night snow, sudden bridges could step over the crest lines before the guns found their calculations. They mocked Allied morale as a chimney fire, spectacular, but easy to smother if you closed the flue. They told stories about green American divisions, about replacements with tags still stiff on their jackets, about platoons that surrendered when encircled before real fighting had started. And they told themselves that veterans in gray-green knew things the newcomers in olive-drab had not yet imagined: how to use woods like a liquid, how to mask a flank with a rumor, how to turn a frozen farmyard into a killing floor. They mocked finally, because mocking is a kind of hope. It is a way of making the enemy smaller before you meet him. In the quiet before H-hour, men smoked and traded these certainties like charms. A captain traced a finger along a paper road and said, "Blow this bridge, take that fuel," and the Americans starved themselves. Heads nodded. Even doubt nodded. On one page, the plan outran the winter, and the math and the laughter sounded like confidence rather than camouflage. What they did not mock, what they only half saw, was the scale behind the things they ridiculed. They saw a Sherman, not a factory, that could make 3 more by the time the snow melted. They saw a road sign, not a continent, that could pour men and gasoline down any road that remained. They saw weather as a wall, not as a door that would swing open in 2 days and let the sky in. But in this hour, under blackout cloth and frost, their certainty held the enemy's weaknesses were written in steel, in habit, in hunger. They would read those weaknesses aloud with engines and track teeth and 88s at dawn. Silence arrived first, dense, padded, the kind that eats boot crunch and coughs. The forest held its breath so completely that even the wind seemed to move by orders. A sentry rubbed his ear where frost had stiffened the lobe and listened for an engine that wasn't there yet. The men waited in holes chopped from earth-gone iron under tarps, webbed with pine boughs, with straw under their psacks and cold in their teeth. Waiting has a taste. It is tin and old smoke and the last sweet film of gasoline on a glove. The colonel walked the line with his map folded into a single strip that showed only what mattered. Rollbon Bridges, a village with a name like a swallowed cough. Voices were low practical. Warm the engines every half hour. No white scarves. Use netting. Primers dry. The pioneers kept their satchel charges wrapped and warm inside coats. The radio men cupped their headphones like altarpieces. A runner carried a canteen of gasoline for the little stove that heated the code cylinder, because metal lies when it is this cold. You need to keep truth warm to read it. Silence makes time elastic. The last hour of night can stretch into something like penance. Men think in spirals: the bridge we must have, the first fusillade, the corner where the road narrows, and the world decides. Someone coughs. The squad leader glares, and then shrugs. Every sound travels in this kind of quiet, even when it feels like nothing can move. The colonel stops at the edge of a cutting and looks out toward a line of black trees. Somewhere beyond them is an enemy, who also waits, likely sleepy, likely thin on the ground. Likely. But likely is a dangerous word to hold in your mouth when you can see your breath. The problem is not courage. The men have that. The problem is the arithmetic that waits like a toll keeper at every mile. Fuel in the drums behind the line, fuel in the tanks. Fuel in the tankers that must follow along roads that will become arguments between wrecks. The plan is a race against dawns: reach the bridges before the engineers wake or are woken by orders to blow them. Reach the fuel dumps before the Americans turn abundance into fire breaks. Reach the Meuse before weather shifts from ally to judge. Waiting sharpens senses and dulls judgment in equal measure. A private swears he smells coffee from across the trees. Another hears a generator throb where there is only his own pulse. The radio man notes a faint hiss that might be atmospheric, might be encryption, might be his imagination, straining against the set's limitations. The colonel hears it too, a kind of far hum the forest sometimes makes before artillery, an unprovable rumor that lives in bone. He has heard it on other mornings, some that became victories, some that became names on tablets. He pretends not to hear it now, because superstition is contagious. In the dark, engineers whisper over bridge charts. They have learned American habits the way a hunter learns a herd, where they cite Bailey panels, how they bolt a trestle when the bank is soft, how routinely they prep demolitions on spans they intend to hold. The German pioneers are good, very good, but they need minutes. Minutes are made of silence and misdirection. Minutes are bought by squads who move like shadow, and by quartermasters who conjure fuel from captured drums. The untold problem is that minutes are the rarest commodity in a plan that spends them faster than gasoline. The sky begins to gray, not with light, but with the idea of it. A crow talks once and is quiet. Somewhere miles off, a single engine rolls over. The colonel feels the men tighten, the way a hand tightens around a tool. He imagines the first obstacle, a farm lane polished, to glass a truck that slides sideways and blocks a column, a bridge wired too thoroughly to be bullied into compliance. He imagines the second, a contact report, from a green American platoon, that nonetheless reaches a battery commander with a wristwatch and a ritual, and then the ritual bearings charges fire for effect. He pushes the thought away. First moves first. Still, the storm that was promised as an ally cannot be ordered to remain. Weather is a guest, not a conscript. If it lifts by midday, the sky will populate itself with silver insects that sting roads and tanks and fuel bowsers alike. Waiting, therefore, becomes wagering. Do we bet courage against altitude? Do we stake surprise against a horizon we can't see? The colonel makes his choice because it is time to make it. He breathes once, twice, 3 times, and hears his own breath as if it belongs to the forest. "Engines," he says to the adjutant, and the silence breaks like a plate. Diesel coughs, gasoline swims in the air, clutches bite. Men crawl from holes and become crews from crews, become a column from column, become a spear with a map for a brain and fuel for blood. The untold problem is still there under every meter of track, in every hose, at each bridge prayerfully intact. But problems can be trampled by momentum if you start hard enough and early enough. The spear lifts, the forest opens, and the first road receives them. For a minute, the world is only forward, and the storm, whichever storm it is, has not yet chosen a side. Shift the map west, and the silence breaks into industry. The Allied buildup did not look like a line of battle so much as a continent practicing a single motion forward. Along beaches long since stripped of drama cranes swing like metronomes, hawsers sing under strain, and Liberty hulls ease against piers until their flanks shine with rope burn. Pallets walk on steel feet. Forklifts chatter. Dock gangs move with the unhurried speed of experts. No one here believes in miracles. They believe in schedules that eat problems. Behind the quays, the roads gather themselves into rivers. Military police in white belts carve order from chaos with the turn of a wrist and the point of a baton. Convoys bloom and string out tailboards, kissing radiators, headlights hooded. Red-letter routes express lanes in a war, carry food powder, spare barrels, tracks, socks, morphine letters, and most of all, fuel. Fuel in cans, in drums, in tanker trucks that smell like hot iron and varnish. Fuel in pipes that snake from the coast to inland tank farms, the way veins find muscles. The pipes are the quiet miracle. They move while men sleep. Depots farther on live like small cities of standardized everything. There is a slot for a shoe and a slot for a piston ring, a place where bearings sit like chessmen, and a place where gun tubes are measured by chalk. A sergeant with a clipboard can raise an entire engine from crates in minutes and send it out into the weather with a tag tucked in like a passport. When weather turns, tents bruise the horizon in every direction, canvas struck taut over wood frames and stoves breathing tin heat. The cooks have learned to feed hunger that is both physical and ceremonial. A hot meal before an attack is a ritual as binding as any order. Airfields tile the rear like mirrors catching sky. Aluminum shimmers in ranks, long-legged fighters, nose to tail. Squat fighter bombers with their bellies full of teeth, transports with thick shoulders and tired, eager crews. Ground men in greasy wool move through the fleets like surgeons and stagehands, swapping out magnetos, fitting rockets to rails, slapping panels closed with the heel of a hand. The flight line has its own weather. It smells of burnt primer and cordite, and coffee sipped too fast. Chalkboards track sorties as if marking tides. In drafty briefing huts, crews listen to men with sticks choreograph arrows on linen-backed maps. Bridges are circled. Crossroads are underlined twice. The voice at the front talks about time on target and interdiction windows, and the old arithmetic of steel and seconds. It is not a glamorous language, but it is fluent. A major says, "We will arrive before the guns have time to forget." The crews nod, because that phrase feels like faith without asking for mysticism. Artillery parks practice like orchestras. Section chiefs talk in numbers that sound like prayers. Ammunition comes on sleds and trucks in boxes that splinter satisfyingly under a crowbar. Batteries in place tear down in place again. Azimuths snap collimators, wink powder bags line up in neat inequality because precision demands variety. Somewhere a colonel times a battalion's transition from march to fire to march again and shakes his head once a 6-second lag off the standard. The men will not sleep until they shave it. And then there are the engineers, that secular priesthood of bridges and explosives. They hang their miracles on banks and call them practical names. A river to an engineer is not a moat. It is a problem with a span. They carry the span in pieces, in recipes, in muscle memory. They know by weight what a panel wants from the men who lift it. They know by the look of a bank how many pickets a trestle needs. They practice in rain because rain is the ordinary weather of trouble. What makes all of this impossible is not a single device or weapon. It is the decision to make the front elastic, to push the coast up to the line by hauling the line back to the coast every night. It is the idea that the enemy can be strangled not only at his throat, but at his ankles and wrists and lungs, all at once by denying him the medium in which war breathes movement. The Allied preparation is not a secret. It is conspicuous. It announces itself with the sound of truck tires and the glare of floodlights over depots and the patient daylight of air power. It is to a soldier who grew up on scarcity an affront. To a staff officer, it is the shape of certainty. The moment of attack does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like a system switching on. Night has a last word of frost, then the east stains pewter, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a single gun speaks the overture. A battery answers, then a battalion, and soon the valley is braided with trajectories, mathematics turned incandescent. Time on target is a modest phrase for what it feels like when every shell intended for a grid square chooses the same heartbeat to arrive. The ground lifts, exhales, and briefly forgets it was ever solid. Guns live by discipline. Pieces traverse and elevate, breaches open like hungry mouths, powder increments vanish into chambers with the soft pride of exactness. Number 1 calls the lay. Number 2 watches fuses like a jeweler. The chief of section stands bent in a posture of protection and command. Fire missions stack, harass, neutralize smoke to blind smoke to guide smoke to sculpt the field into something the assault can read. Off to the flank, heavies write a different language on the far sky, long deliberate clauses aimed at rail yards and bridges the enemy thought were hours away from relevance. They are relevant now. Over all this, the air thickens with decision. Fighter bombers come low in pairs and fours, square-shouldered and loud, slinging rockets that leave chalk lines through the morning. They work the roads like surgeons, finding arteries, the culvert, just before the bend. The bridge whose abutments have been carefully undercut, the intersection, already cursed by 1,000 drivers. Bombs fall not on romance but on schedules. A convoy is a clock, and the air knows how to break clocks. Higher up, fighter cover sketches loops and scissors into a sky that cannot settle. Recon birds stitch film for the next hour's orders before this hour is finished bleeding. Infantry go forward in waves that feel less like surf and more like weather moving across a county line. Squads advance by bounds written in doctrine but paced by intuition. Platoon leaders talk with their hands and eyebrows and short-board words. The first wire is a test, the second a promise, the third, the last thing a man remembers before the field becomes houses and fences and dogs that no longer bark. Bazooka teams haul their tubes like inconvenient gifts. Machine gunners make temporary furniture from ammo cans and bipods and faith. Medics invent new shapes of running. Tanks do not so much advance as adjudicate. They arrive at arguments the infantry has been having with a farmhouse or a knoll and compose a conclusion in high-velocity prose. The air calls them blunt instruments. The infantry calls them friends. When the road narrows, dozers nose aside the world. When the bridge is down, engineers discover that down is a temporary condition and write a counterfact across the water. A Bailey panel drops into place, bolts clack, and suddenly there is a sentence where there was only a comma. The secret, if there is one, is choreography. Nothing here is strongest by itself. Artillery without eyes is temper. Air power without timing is spectacle. Infantry without engines is courage squandered. Tanks without bridges are statues of intention. Together they become a grammar the enemy cannot parse fast enough. A call goes up from a forward observer. A battery adjusts. A smoke screen breathes. Fighter-bombers pivot. A company steps through the moment the field decides to be kind. From a hill, the whole thing looks improbable. Inside it, it feels inevitable. At place, the rhythm becomes personal. A road that at dawn was private property of Frost now belongs to battalion traffic discipline and the occasional miracle. A crossroads loses its name to a grid reference and then loses even that to dust. The first wave takes the things that kill first: machine guns, angles, courage, and breaks them. The second wave takes the surrendering details, seller's paperwork, a drawer of photographs that make the house a home again. By the time the third wave arrives, the field has been persuaded. The enemy still fights always, but now he fights inside an argument he did not write. When the day's light has gone brassy, and the guns begin to sound like a tired room, the supply echelons step forward, as if they had been coiled in the hedges all along. Water cans, ammo, hot food bandages, spare barrels, new tracks. The tail moves into the space the teeth have opened and becomes a new jaw. The front has migrated, not by magic, by method. The men at the very edge taste cordite and dust and the sudden bitter coffee of victory's first hour. Behind them, 1,000 small machines keep humming. Ahead of them, the map is shorter than the gauges. That is how an attack sustains itself. Long after the first trumpet is quiet, it replaces music with momentum and makes the day end where the plan says tomorrow should begin. December 17, 1944. The attack begins like a rumor becoming a shout. Columns nose through Honsfeld and Büllingen, exhaust blooming white chains, scraping ice commanders with scarves up to their eyes, counting fences, poles, hedgerows, anything that confirms the map is not lying. At first, the plan holds green Americans' startled vehicles, abandoned half-parked boots without owners in doorways. Then the road tightens once, then always, and the day discovers its appetite. A half-track slithers on black ice and blocks a bend. The driver's curses turn to steam. Men put shoulders to armor boots, to mud physics, to prayer. Radios begin to fill with competing certainties. Bridge intact, negative charges seen, alternate route left, left is mined, hold for pioneers, you cannot hold. The net becomes a heated room, everybody speaks until nobody is heard. The battalion commander voice, clipped and tidy, demands silence. Silence does not obey. In Stavalo, the first artillery search rounds feel like questions asked by a god. The answers are loud. Windows leap from frames, slate skitters, eaves become knives. The lead Panthers nose into streets where light has a color orange then black, and where every doorway holds both danger and the smell of someone's breakfast cooked 2 hours ago. Machine gun threads whip down alleys. Grenades wink like bad stars. A runner stumbles back with blood frozen shiny on his sleeve and announces a bridge blown with a politeness that belongs in another century. Command tries to re-knit itself, one field phone at a time. Wire parties string line that loops like nervous handwriting across snow. Somewhere an American shell writes its critique, and the line goes slack. Couriers run the old way, paper clipped to boards, orders in 5 sentences, arrows sketched with the confidence of men who need confidence. Each order loses weight as it passes from glove to glove. By the time it reaches the company commander who must live with it, it is an opinion. Fear appears as efficiency at first. Crews reload faster. Drivers check mirrors 3 times. Pioneers count fuses aloud like rosary beads. But fear is a solvent, eventually it finds seams. A sergeant's voice goes high when he should be low. A lieutenant stands too long at an intersection, memorizing angles he will never need. A Panther lingers in the open because the driver refuses to trust the next patch of ice. In the best units, fear becomes speed. In the worst, it becomes waiting with the engine off. The Americans who were supposed to be scattered and drowsy locate themselves with a competence that feels like insult. A platoon that should have fled instead throws 2 shots down a street and sets a rhythm. Somewhere a 57mm that has no right to kill a Panther anyway makes the crew duck long enough for a bazooka team to find courage. Above the cloud ceiling, there is only rumor, and then the rumor becomes a dot, then 2, and rockets sow the crossroads with reason. Command posts keep moving rearward, not because of cowardice, but because the map keeps erasing places to stand. A staff captain with blue lips tries to articulate the day as if it were still obedient. We'll bypass Stavelot. Trois Ponts is priority, commit reserve. The reserve is a promise made to oneself. Bridges talk in one syllable, no. Engineers die in the speech they speak. Best measured, practical, persuasive, trying to make water briefly solid, trying to make explosives repent. By afternoon, the radio takes on a new timbre. A defeated music overlaps stepped-on call signs, phrases that trail off, because the man who owned them has moved or fallen or discovered that his battery is a liar in the cold. The regiment tries to designate point of main effort again. The battlefield grins and vetoes the notion. A major with his map on his knees discovers that paper is not elastic. He draws a new arrow, and the pencil snaps. It is an omen he refuses to accept. Civilians appear like ghosts, a woman with a bucket, a boy with a bicycle and nowhere left to go, a dog that will not bark. War has come to their home, and insultingly, the men who bring it seem less sure of themselves than the furniture does. A panther reverses into a stable, jaws hay, exhales black and guilty. A cow looks at the barrel and decides not to understand. Night promises cover and keeps half its word. Under blackout, the column tries to lengthen into a spear again. Guides whisper distances that do not match reality. The regimental commander, cheeks burn-marked by wind, walks 100 meters alone to believe his own orders. Somewhere far too far, an engine coughs and dies empty. The sound of siphoned fuel becomes the night's lullaby. The system of command has not broken. It has frayed enough that initiative now looks like mutiny and obedience looks like delay. At Trois Ponts, a final decision meets a final negative. The bridge goes clean as a pulled tooth. The concussion pats cheeks, rocks buttons, settles matters. The radio's last coherent sentence of the day, use Stumont Road, is half order, half hiccup. The men move because there is always a next road. But in the spaces between orders, a new understanding accumulates, like frost on steel speed, has met terrain, plan, has met weather, courage, has met arithmetic. And arithmetic is not impressed. Realization does not arrive with a trumpet. It arrives as a series of small humiliations that add to a verdict. A fuel bowser promised at 1300 wanders in at 1700 with hoses torn, and a driver who looks older than his papers. The column drinks him dry and remains thirsty. A bridge that maps insisted was prepared for capture detonates with such finality that even the optimists stop talking. An American artillery battery shifts from harassing to conversational. Every corner, a remark, every assembly area, a punchline. The Luftwaffe, which for days had been described as a card held close to the chest, plays itself as a rumor that never sits at the table. Weather lifts just enough to let P-47s appear small and terrible, their rockets painting punctuation across roads the regiment requires. Men who an hour earlier mocked Allied reliance on air power now discover how it feels to live under grammar, written from above commas, where they wanted dashes, periods, where they wanted ellipses. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, a captain says the quiet part aloud. 50,000 gallons is nothing at this speed. No one contradicts him because the numbers have replaced doctrine. Tigers are statues without gasoline. Panthers denied bridges become arguments losing air. A corporal who can mend anything with wire and profanity lifts his hands in surrender to physics. There is no wire long enough to reach the next depot, no profanity strong enough to move a stone bridge back onto its piers. Prisoners help by accident. 2 American mechanics shivering talk about tank farms the way farmers talk about rain, expected, scheduled, taken into account. They speak of pipelines like conveniences, turn a valve and a river moves. The colonel listens with the politeness of a man at a funeral his own. He calculates in the soft way a professional does when he wishes to remain brave. Even if this day's bridges had held, even if this town had been kinder, the machine on the other side would still have more miles in it than he can afford. Command tries one more reorganization, one more clever thrust along a sleeve of road the maps had ignored. The thrust becomes a bottleneck. The bottleneck becomes a target. The target becomes a lesson repeated for the men at the back who cannot yet see it. Fear is efficient now. It finds the places where training leaves off and replaces them with instinct. Instinct is to live. Living requires moving. Moving requires fuel. The circle closes with a click that feels like fate. And still the men fight because that is what men do when the map goes wrong. A panther covers a withdrawal with an elegance that would have impressed a school solution in summer. Infantry peel off in pairs that would make any instructor proud. A medic invents a way to carry two where he was trained to carry one. None of it changes the clock. The clock belongs to the enemy, an enemy that measures time in convoys and sorties and the indifferent patience of logistics. Evening steals color from the Ardennes. Snow reflects a sky already forgetting the day. Orders settle into words like hold, delay, break contact. The colonel writes a short message to hire that says nothing treasonous and everything true fuel. Critical bridges denied resistance, stiffening air active. He folds it into a voice that remains calm because he is still who he was this morning, competent, proud, unwilling to let panic borrow his rank. When the reply arrives, acknowledged continue mission, he smiles without humor. Continuing is no longer a tactic, it is a courtesy. The final clarity appears in a small thing. A young grenadier face blackened with cordite asks if they will reach the Meuse tomorrow. The colonel, who has lied nobly on other days to keep men alive long enough to win, cannot find a useful lie now. He says, "We will reach where we can." The boy nods satisfied by the shape of an answer, if not its content. Realization is not an epiphany. It is a distribution. It spreads along the column across the companies through the nets. Men begin to make the small preparations that armies make when the momentum has slipped, checking routes back as carefully as they checked routes forward, pocketing extra matches, loosening straps that will need to loosen quickly later. Somewhere behind the line, a supply NCO stares at his clipboard and sees not shortages, but a difference in species. The enemy's problems are about where to put things. His are about whether things exist. When night finally closes, the column does not feel defeated so much as outnumbered by realities it cannot shoot. They started the day believing they were racing a surprised adversary. They end it understanding they have been running in place on a conveyor built by a continent. The machine doesn't celebrate. It simply keeps moving. In the weeks after the column stalls, the map reveals itself not as a surface, but as a system. The failure at Honsfeld, Stavelot, Trois Ponts is not a single broken tooth on a gear. It is proof that the gear itself is wrong for the engine it inhabits. The Axis winter thrust had wagered on speed, outrunning supply on captured fuel, bridging the shortfall on bridges captured rather than rebuilt on weather as a leash around Allied air power. Each premise collapses under a weight measured not in courage but in capacity. Strategically, the consequence is arithmetic made territorial. The Meuse remains uncrossed. Antwerp remains a mouth that never stops chewing freight. The German timetable does not slip by hours. It dissolves into snowmelt. Corps reorient divisions, cannibalize brigades, rediscover that retreat sucks fuel as surely as advance does. The counteroffensive that was supposed to reset the Western Front's psychology instead resets its physics. The Allied line bends, then hardens, then marches. By January, the salient becomes a topographic memory, and the memory serves as curriculum. Allied staffs annotate margins, blow bridges, early feed engineers first trust air the moment the ceiling breaks. For the Axis, the long arc bends toward depletion, with a visible hinge. The oil campaign, which had felt like distant pressure in summer, now reads as immediate scarcity on paper and immobility in forests. Units begin to treat movement itself as a luxury item. March tables that once described reach now describe radius. Within that shrinking circle, doctrine shifts from initiative to improvisation, and improvisation unpowered becomes delay. The Luftwaffe's absence stops being an anecdote and hardens into a condition, ground crews skilled as ever pilots, brave as ever tanks of avgas, whispering no. The Allied machine conversely learns the shape of its own strength and begins to lean into it without apology. Pipelines get teeth. Depots move forward, as if on rails. Traffic discipline turns roads into organs with rhythm and rest. When bridges go, they return on command labeled and ledgered. When the air clears, interdiction becomes a routine rather than an event. Rail yards that once recovered in days now fail to finish a morning. And behind every tactical success, the same domestic engine hums factories that consider a destroyed tank not a tragedy, but an order. Training depots that understand casualties as throughput. Shipyards that measure victory in berths. The winter thrust was supposed to buy time to argue in diplomacy, time to reposition in the East, time to frighten a coalition into negotiating. Instead, it purchases a different commodity: Allied certainty. Certainty that logistics is not backstory. Certainty that a bridge denied is worth a battalion destroyed. Certainty that no local shock can overturn continental mass if the mass keeps moving with modest, relentless competence. In March, when rivers unfreeze and the Rhine becomes an assignment rather than a myth, bridging battalions arrive already rehearsed by Ardennes knights. In April, when armies discover that Germany can still fight in cities like a wounded cathedral, artillery schedules and truck parks arrive like old friends. Long-term, the lesson metastasizes into policy. Post-war planners will point to these weeks as the moment it became impossible to think of war as heroism sustained by luck. They will speak in language that sounds cold: throughput, redundancy, surge capacity. And the veterans will nod because they remember how hot redundant fuel feels when poured from a can into a tank that would otherwise be a tomb. The Germans had imagined quality could punish quantity. The winter proved the inverse truth with compassionless clarity. Quantity, when trained, when organized, when supplied by a nation-scale tale, becomes a quality of its own. The spear that halted in Belgian snow teaches both sides what can and cannot be willed. Will can hold a village. Will can force a bend in a line. Will cannot pump gasoline into an empty drum through hope. What survives into the spring is not the romance of the thrust, but the architecture of the answer bridges that arrive on trucks, skies that weaponize weather windows, and a logistics grammar that writes the front forward whether or not a single trumpet blows. Years later, in a small room that smells of furniture polish and old wool, a retired officer is asked about the Ardennes. He removes his glasses the way a man does when he is about to be honest. He speaks carefully, as if telling the truth were a delicate machine, and he does not want to drop apart. "We were not beaten by courage," he says. "We had that. We were not beaten by tanks. Ours were good. We were beaten by miles, by gallons, by bridges that returned from the dead, while ours died forever. By roads that were not merely lines, but living things with police and schedules and discipline. We were beaten by a nation that could make war faster than we could think it." He talks about the morning a bridge at Trois Ponts came apart like a sentence ending. He recalls a prisoner in a thin jacket explaining a pipeline as if he were describing a garden hose turn the valve, and the day obeys. He remembers the tone of his own radio changing from command to commentary, and how he kept his voice level, because that is what officers do when the weather turns against them. "I still believe in initiative," he says. But initiative without fuel is courage walking. He does not excuse atrocities. He does not hide behind weather. He does not blame a single staff colonel or a faulty clutch. He says the word machine without bitterness, almost with relief, as if naming the thing reduces its power over memory. "We were fighting men," he says, but across from us was something larger, men inside a system that refused to tire. We could win a street, and they would answer with a bridge. We could silence a gun, and they would answer with a factory. The interviewer asks him if he knew on that first day what the 50,000 gallons in the American yard really meant. He smiles the smallest smile a soldier can make. "I knew it meant we could move," he says. "I did not yet know it meant they could move forever." He puts his glasses back on, and the room becomes ordinary again, table window afternoon light. The tape clicks softly. The officer looks at his hands, at the old scars that no longer ache, and offers the sentence that has followed him through years of sleep. "We were not fighting an army," he says. "We were fighting a machine."